So welcome to Accountability That Counts. And to let you know, you will get a copy of the slides later on this afternoon. Colin will be sending those out, so you can look for those. And you can interrupt as we go with a question by typing in the box, or there will be also time for questions at the end. And you're also welcome to contact us later if something comes up. So what we're going to talk about today is how having an accountability structure can help your organization to be more effective and more streamlined in your work, and also to make better decisions as you're building strategy. And also we'll talk a little bit about how to build that accountability structure so that you can begin to put those pieces in place for your organization. So if I can get the slide to go. So the first question is, why have an accountability structure? And it's largely to help you stay on track, moving towards your goals, and to develop systems that avoid mistakes whenever possible, and to ensure that your staff and leaders have the support they need to be successful. So really, a lot of what an accountability structure is good systems. It's things, when you do things repeatedly in your organization, you're not making those things up every time. You have a system that everyone knows how to use. You also have a good communication system, so people know what's going on and what they're responsible for, and also what other people are responsible for. And it's also a way that helps you, as I said, to make good decisions. So it's part of your decision-making structure as well. So some of these things I just said, but it's also a way to keep track of everything that needs to get done. It helps you capture things that have worked well, and it also helps you once you've started building an accountability structure, it gets easier to create those systems when you need them. So the first piece of an accountability structure is what we call at Action Circles a happy ending. Some people call the happy ending the big, hairy, audacious goal. Some people call it a vision statement. For us, a happy ending is really the end result that you're working towards. And for us, it's really a clear picture of that end result, not a high and mighty vision statement that's hard to imagine what it actually means. So we do really encourage you to work hard to write. Usually it comes out as a paragraph, a really clear statement of this is what we're working towards. And this might be what your organization is working towards in the very big picture, or it could be for a specific campaign that you're working on, a smaller happy ending, so to speak. So I'll be talking a lot about an accountability structure in the context of a campaign plan, but we apply it throughout both organizationally and in a campaign. And I'll explain that a little bit as we go along. But the happy ending or the big goal is really important because it's basically how you make your decisions as you go along. You're going to be making strategic decisions for your organization or for your campaign. And the best way to know if something is a good strategy is to ask objectively, if we do X, does it get us closer to our goal? And that gives you a structure for having that conversation when people are proposing strategies or tactics, or you're having to be nimble in the moment and change course, so that you don't make a decision that actually might seem really good in the short term, but it actually moves you away from your end goal. And as people get used to that structure and that focus on the end goal, those conversations get easier and easier. So the first few times you put this into effect, it can be a little bit awkward or difficult. But as you all practice in your organization, and you get used to asking each other, oh, if we do that, what's the path to our goal, or what's the path to our happy ending? That does become your accountability structure, because you're holding each other accountable to your goal that you have set together and all agreed to. And so rather than saying, oh, that's a dumb idea, I don't like it, you can say, I don't see how that idea leads us to our goal. Can you map that out for me? And if someone can convince you, then maybe it is actually a good decision. Another big piece of your accountability structure is your campaign plan or your work plan. People have different names for this. At Action Circles, we do week by week campaign plans, and we often also organizationally have month by month work plans. So because of the nature of our organization, we serve multiple clients. We have a campaign plan for each client, but then we also have a work plan for our business, our organization, that includes the management of the business, of the organization. So things like renewing contracts with our clients, or updating the website, or getting our webinars ready to go, that aren't for a specific client. They're in the bigger work plan. And that's usually, like I said, for us, it's month to month. But for a client, it is usually week to week, especially if we're working on a specific goal for the client. So when you're building your work plan or your campaign plan, it's really important to make sure that everyone sees how they fit into the overall plan. So when we build work plans, I'm just going to call them work plans for the rest of the webinar. When we build work plans, we have not just the tasks that need to be done, but who's responsible for doing them. And sometimes, how you do that is really a matter of what works for your organization. We've tried various things, including having different colors designated for each of us here so that we can easily see, oh, I'm blue. Anything that's blue is my responsibility. Sometimes we've used our initials after different tasks to show, especially if more than one of us is working on something, the colors get a little weird. So we'll do initials after the task, but showing who's responsible for each thing, and then making sure that people understand how their specific tasks and also their role in the organization fits into the overall plan. So, for instance, in a lot of organizations that I've worked with, I often see that the development people are not necessarily connected to the advocacy work, and they might know this is the budget, but they don't necessarily know when big expenditures are going to be made for the campaign, or they might not know why you suddenly need more money, or they might not understand why you're hiring 2 temporary organizers on your campaign, and they just know they need to raise $75,000 or whatever the amount is. And having everyone at least be notified why their piece is important, and having everybody's work in the plan is really helpful, because that also helps, for instance, the advocacy people to think about, oh, if we need the fundraiser to raise this much money, is there something we could be doing that would get people excited and would help the fundraiser people build that message around donating and stuff like that. So that's just one example. But also, for instance, if you have somebody who's acting as an advocate in the State House, and then you have someone who's working in the field as an organizer, if those 2 people don't know how their efforts are related to each other and how one can drive the other, it's not always the same one driving, that can really make it harder for everybody to do a good job. So making that really clear. ideally you're all building your plan together, but at the very least, if you're not building it together, you have a meeting that walks everybody through the plan and it answers their questions about why are we doing this then, why is this important, and that sort of thing. We really recommend creating systems to make it easier to provide information to each other, and then also establishing the expectation that everyone is going to participate in those systems. Now, a big piece of this is making sure that those systems work for everyone. So you might try something. We've done this here at Action Circles. We've tried a variety of things when we are building our communications system for the legislative session. When we were building that, we tried a bunch of different tools. We tried different ways to use those tools before we finally landed on what worked for us as a team and also what works for our clients. So this little list is a short list of some of the things that we have found that work really well. So, for instance, as I mentioned, because we serve a variety of clients, we tend to schedule a weekly meeting, usually a phone call, with each of our clients when the campaign is running fast during the legislative session. And then when it's going a little bit slower during the off season, we might have twice a month meetings, or sometimes even just monthly meetings, depending on the client and their needs. But we get those on the calendar. It's always easier to cancel a meeting than to schedule a meeting when you're very busy. So knowing that those are there, and knowing that usually you're going to have a group of leaders who are engaged in your work every day and paying attention to it. And then there's going to be another circle that's a little bit bigger, that are people that need to know what's going on and might need to have input into decisions that are being made, but they might not know what's going on every single day. So having those meetings gives those people a chance to participate at that level. The regular updates is another thing. So in our case, this goes out by email, but it can be a variety of ways. So this is, we have our work plan, and then each week we send an update saying, this is what happened this week. And if we're not on track with our work plan, we explain why and what our recommendation is. And we might, if we have a question that we need the client to answer, then we would flag that and say, when we get on our call, we need to talk about this and get an answer from you. This could also happen with staff meetings. The shared documents for us, we use Google Drive. We've tried a couple of different tools. In the end, we found Google Drive was the simplest and easiest to access for all of us. So here, on our team, we have to send an update to each of our clients. And we each have different responsibilities for each client. So we have set 8 people on our team during the legislative session because we have a few interns. And we have a Google document for each client. And whenever anyone does something related to that client during the week, they put a note on the update document for that client. And that serves 2 purposes. One is when we're writing our update at the end of the week, we don't have to go back and remember what happened. We just have to go through and, flesh it out and add a little bit of detail. Or maybe something happened on Tuesday, but then it changed on Thursday, so we have to edit it a little bit. The other is that each of us can see all through the week what's going on for that client. So Falco and I share responsibility for actually communicating day to day with our clients. And sometimes Cindy and Colin have an assignment to do something for a client during the week. And the client might text me and say, hey, did that get done? And I can just open up the Google Doc and see that they put a note in that, yes, the action alert went out, or yes, the supporter cards got delivered. so that I don't have to track down Cindy or Colin, because we're rarely in the same room together. So for us, that's what works. If you're all working in one big room in your organization, you might not need to do it that way. You might, for instance, use a whiteboard in your office where people are just putting check marks next to something when it's done. We also like to use a text group string. So I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but basically our whole team has a group text going every day when the legislature's in session, so that we all know where each other are. And Cindy, who's not in the State House, has the responsibility of checking the legislative schedules throughout the day, the committee schedules, to check and see if things have changed. And she's able to text us and say, hey, Senate Health and Welfare is meeting in 10 minutes. And then Falco and I could decide who's going to go cover that. Are we sending an intern or one of us going? But all of us are on that string all day long so that we all know what's going on. And we don't have to be trying to figure out where everybody is or what's happening for a client. So one of the things about accountability is, things happen, mistakes get made. And if you have a really good accountability structure, when a mistake happens, it's much easier to recover from the mistake, because you don't waste time blaming each other about the mistake that was made. You're more focused on how do we either fix it, or if we can't fix it, what's our next step? And so this is really important, to create this culture. It doesn't really matter whose fault it is, because in our opinion, if a mistake gets made, it's a systemic problem. Somebody didn't know what they were supposed to do, or they didn't have the right information, or they didn't have the right support around it. Or sometimes it's just like a straight up, I thought this was true, but this other thing was actually true. And so really creating a culture where people, as soon as they know something is going wrong, they speak up, they ask for help, and people actually step forward and help. That will make it easier, because having that culture of safety will mean that people will actually tell you sooner that there's a problem, and then you'll be able to work together as a team to fix it. So this is as simple as, I'm not going to get my assignment done on time. My assignment might be due on Friday. I might actually know on Monday that there's no way I'm going to get it done by Friday. If I say that on Monday, my team can find a way to help me figure out what to do, either by helping me do the assignment or strategizing about what do we do if it doesn't get done. Is there a way we can get an extension on a deadline? But if I wait until Thursday night or Friday morning to tell people I'm not going to get this done by Friday, then we have a much bigger problem. And people aren't perfect. I have waited till the last minute thinking some miracle would happen and I would get things done. And I always regret it when I do that. And I know that my team will support me if I ask for help. And it's really about creating that culture, and also working. Each individual has to believe that that's the right thing to do as well, because it's not easy to admit that you made a mistake. So everyone who's a leader either in your campaign or in your organization needs to know has to agree to the work plan, and also has to agree to the accountability structure. So for instance, when I was talking about all those communication tools, we tried one tool that I couldn't use it. It didn't work for me. I couldn't see it on my phone when I was looking at it. I couldn't figure out how to type things into it. And that meant that it didn't work for anybody, because I wasn't participating in our accountability structure. And so we had to say, this tool we cannot use because everybody hasn't agreed to it and it doesn't work. And we had to try something else. And it's really important. It's not just a dictator saying, this is what we're doing and you have to participate in it. You might say that to someone like a temporary intern who's only going to be working with you for 3 months. But you can't say that to someone who's really a part of your team and is going to be working with you going forward. If a tool doesn't work for them or they're unable to use it, then you have to find a different tool. So, for instance, if you have someone on your team who's colorblind, you can't assign tasks by color. You have to find a different way. So debriefing is a huge part of an accountability structure, and we are really committed to debriefing. It's, in my opinion, it's actually the most fun part of building an accountability structure. It helps to build that culture of safety when you do the debrief. It helps to build your team. It also helps you to really build systems that work for your team if you debrief regularly. And when I say regularly, basically, so you have one big goal, but in your work plan, you probably have 3 or 4 key benchmarks at a minimum in your work plan leading towards the goal. We really like to do a debrief after each key benchmark. So again, we're working for many clients. One of the things we do during the legislative session is at the town meeting day break, as a staff, we meet and we talk about each client, how we're doing with each client, how we're doing so far with our communications tools, as a team, an Action Circles team. If we're trying out a new system, we check in on that, and we do that again at the end of the legislative session. We will also, if the clients are open to it and willing, we'll have debriefs with them at key points throughout the year, usually at least at the end of the legislative session, but we try to do a couple throughout the year. It's really important to do this because it really helps you to correct things that aren't working, and it helps you to, when something's going really well, it helps you to really capitalize on that. So these are the questions that we ask when we're doing our debrief. So at Action Circles, we have some core principles that we work from. So one of the first things we ask is, how are we doing on those principles? Do we feel like we let something go or fell down on something? And what do we want to do about that? If we did, if we're doing really well, we ask, how did we manage to stick to that so well? Is there something we're doing that we want to really acknowledge and make sure we keep doing it? We ask about our goals and objectives. Are we on track? If we're at the end of a campaign, did we do what we set out to do? If we're somewhere in the middle or partway through, are we on track with meeting our objectives? Do we need to change course? We ask, what really worked well? What didn't work as well as we thought it might? What kinds of things do we want to remember for the next time? How are we going to remember? Sometimes we're not going to do this again for a whole year. So how are we going to remember, something that worked really well or didn't work really well? Sometimes that means we put it in our Google Calendar to put a reminder up. Sometimes sometimes we have a Google Doc for, if it's specific to a client, we might have a document for the client that's just notes for next year or notes for the next plan. We might have one for Action Circles. For instance, if something really worked well for the webinar, we might have a running document about webinars. And then, of course, we always ask, what do we wish had or had not happened? So Is there something that either was in our control or not in our control that either did happen or did not happen, and then that wasn't really great for us, or was really good, would have been really good for us, but it didn't happen. And then just sort of talk about that a little bit. Is there something we could have done differently, even though maybe it wasn't our fault that it did or didn't happen? Is there anything we could have done leading up to it or after it that would have made it a better outcome for us? And then was there a bonus surprise that was a happy thing that happened? Hi, I see someone else joined. I'm not sure who it is yet, but welcome. We're partway through. I'm just going to keep going. So one thing we always like to say is make sure that you celebrate your victories. So anything that went really well, you really want to take a little bit of time to acknowledge that. If you had a big victory, like you've been working for 3 years and you finally got a bill passed, have a party. It's worth it, because people need to take a moment and acknowledge that they accomplished something. But also, even if you had a small victory, it's really worth taking, even if you only take 5 minutes and just acknowledge to each other that, hey, that went really well. Wow, that new system we created for the schedule, keeping track of everybody's schedule, that really worked. That was great. And if somebody was instrumental in making that piece work, acknowledge them and, say thank you. Because this, again, it helps to create that culture where people feel good about being part of the team. They feel like their contributions are important, even if they're small contributions. They see how they fit into the bigger picture. So this is actually, it seems like it can be a small thing, but it can really make a big difference when you're trying to build a structure and a culture in your organization. Okay, so this is the hardest part. So you really need to systematize things that work. So when you do your debrief and you've asked all those questions and you have the list of things that went well, the next question is, can we create a system so that that is as automated as possible, that we all know how to do it, we just plug things into it, and then if it's possible to do that, you actually write a work plan for how to get that systematization done. And then you build it, and then you test it, and you probably have to tweak it a little bit, and you have to make sure it works for everyone. We talked about that a little bit before. So, for instance, one of the things we do a lot with our clients is they collect supporter cards, which are little postcards or flyers that people sign that say, I support this bill or I support this issue, and they write a little note to their legislator, and then they come to us and we organize them so that they're ready to be delivered to legislators, and we also do the data entry for the client. So that they have a list of everyone who did a card. And the first time we did that, it took a long time to figure out how to do it all. And Colin was really responsible for sorting that out. And then after that first time, one of the debrief parts was what pieces of that worked really well and what pieces didn't work so well. And let's create a system for doing this with a client so that whenever we're going to do this with a client, we all know exactly how to explain the process. We all know exactly what's going to happen to those cards when they come into the office. We all know exactly how to get them organized. So we might not all know exactly how to do each piece, but we know our part of the process, and it is written down how to do it so that, God forbid, Colin's not here and we need to do it, we could figure it out. Also the same with our calendar. So during the legislative session, the calendar changes very rapidly. Falco and I and the interns are in the State House. Cindy and Colin and Jake are not in the State House, but they need to generally know where we are and what we're doing and how that relates to the work that they're doing. And so we tried many different iterations of a calendar system. We ended up with a Google Doc that we update. That's a document for the week that we update hour by hour during the session. And we have a system where at the top of the document we say who updated it and what time it was last updated, so that we know, oh, Cindy just checked the schedules 5 minutes ago. We don't need to check them right this second. So those kinds of things, like really making it work and then testing it out. And we tried several things before we got to that calendar system, and we'll probably tweak it a little bit more at the end of this legislative session. So again, sometimes a smaller group is doing a debrief. Maybe you have just your staff or a core group of volunteer leaders doing your debrief, but then there's probably a larger group that needs to know, hey, here are the things we learned, and by the way, we're going to try to build some of these new systems, and we'd like your input on these systems. So it's important to have a way to report that back, and then if you need to collect feedback from people, also do that. This is a piece of your accountability structure, is this report back. So for us, the way that looks is our team does our debrief, and then we do a debrief with the client, and we're listening to the client, but we're also reporting on the things that we noticed that worked well and didn't work well, or the lessons that we learned. We want to share that also back with the client. And then the client might have a board, or they might have a larger group of people that are engaged on their campaign, like a coalition, that they also want to report back to, and we may be part of that report. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're writing a report that then they present to their organizations. So it depends on your organization and what your process is, but it should be clear who those people are that need to know that information and how they're going to get it and when they're going to get it. And also, again, if you're soliciting their feedback, what's the process for that, and what is their power to make decisions if you're building new systems? So this might sound like a lot to you. It is a lot. It can take a really long time to build a complete accountability structure, but even just putting one piece at a time in place and letting people get used to that, it can really help. It can also, like I said, help to build that culture in your organization where people know that it's important to speak up if they're having trouble doing a task or meeting a deadline. It's also building that culture of really talking about when things are working well, so that you can make sure that keeps happening in your organization. It can help just to have people feel more in touch with what's going on in your organization, and more involved in the work that you're doing, even if their role seems relatively small. Doing these a little piece at a time can really help different people in your organization feel like they're part of the team and that they have a role to play and they have an impact on the work that you're doing. All right, so I can answer questions. And oh, Kate, I see it was Kate that joined. And just so you know, Kate, Colin will send out the full PowerPoint later on this afternoon, so you will get that. And if you want to follow up with questions later, you can. So for now, you can either unmute yourself and speak, or if you have a question, you can type in the chat box.